There comes a point where your heart has given enough, your hands have reached far enough, and your soul says no more. That's the moment, the pivotal moment, when you decide to pull back, not out of bitterness, not out of manipulation, but because you've finally woken up to your own value. For too long, you've been the one overcompensating, the one showing up, the one staying available, even when he stayed inconsistent. You are giving love with both hands while barely receiving it with one. But here's the truth. People rarely value what they can predict and access anytime they want. When your energy is on tap, it gets taken for granted. But the moment you pull back, that moment becomes sacred. It creates a void, it creates space, and in that space, something powerful happens. Awareness is born, not just in him, but in you. He starts to feel the shift, the absence, the silence, and that silence is louder than every word you ever spoke. You see, your worth isn't something you scream out loud. It's something you embody, and sometimes the only way for someone to see that worth is to feel what life looks like without it. When you were always there, always accessible, always trying, he never had to reflect. But now he's sitting with the empty seat your energy used to fill. This isn't a tactic, this is transformation. You're no longer living in fear of what happens if you let go. You're now stepping fully into your own power. You're no longer the woman who needs to be chosen. You've become the woman who chooses, and that, right there, flips the entire script. That's when he starts realizing what he lost. That's when your worth becomes undeniable. When you decide to pull back, something powerful begins to unfold, not just between you and him, but within you. The space you create by stepping away is not empty, it's full of truth. It's full of silence that speaks and distance that reveals. When you're constantly engaged, always initiating, always available, always trying, you leave no room for the other person to feel the weight of your absence. And without that weight, there is no urgency, no accountability, no recognition. But when you pause, when you stop chasing and start observing, you create a gap, and in that gap, clarity has the chance to rise. This space you create isn't about playing hard to get. It's about getting real. It's about no longer doing the emotional labor for two. It's about stepping back long enough to see what happens when you're no longer the one holding it all together. Because when you're constantly present, you're managing the energy of the connection. You're buffering the silence, softening the distance, and compensating for his lack of effort. But the moment you pull back, the emotional scaffolding you were holding in place disappears. And that's when the structure is tested. That's when you find out whether there's anything on his side holding it up. He may not notice immediately, but over time the routine changes. The daily comfort of your words, your warmth, your consistency fades, and suddenly he feels the difference. He starts to realize that something valuable has gone quiet. The space you leave behind becomes a mirror. It reflects his choices, his patterns, his absence, and what you once tried to explain through words, your silence now shows without saying anything at all. The energy shift becomes undeniable. He doesn't have to wonder if you're tired. You've shown it. You've demonstrated that your attention is no longer free. More importantly, that space you created also becomes your own sanctuary. It gives you the clarity to see what the relationship actually is, not what you hope it could become. You begin to feel the weight you are carrying. You begin to understand that effort is not love when it's one-sided. The space gives you perspective, and in that perspective, you reclaim your vision. You stop asking, how can I make him see my worth? And you start asking, why did I need him to? When you pull back, you reset the dynamic. You stop giving the comfort of your presence without the effort of his. You stop cushioning his lack of effort with your overcompensation. And in doing so, you allow both of you to truly see what's been happening all along. It's in that space, not in the words, not in the arguments, not in the begging, but in the quiet, deliberate pause where realization begins. Clarity cannot exist in the noise of constant effort. It needs space. And that's what pulling back gives you, the power of space, the gift of reflection, and the beginning of a much-needed truth. When you're always there, always showing up, always giving, your presence starts to fade into the background. Not because it lacks value, but because it becomes expected. Human nature often struggles to appreciate what's consistent until it's gone. That's the tragedy of overavailability. When someone never has to wonder if you'll be there, they stop thinking about what it means that you are there. Your love, your effort, your presence, things that should feel sacred, start to feel ordinary, not because they are, but because they're always within reach. And when something is always within reach, people stop reaching for it. But the moment you pull back, truly pull back, not with drama or manipulation, but with quiet confidence, everything changes. Suddenly, he's left with a silence that feels unfamiliar. The texts aren't coming in. The emotional check-ins are missing. The conversations once initiated by you have paused, and that pause doesn't go unnoticed. It creates a shift, a space that makes him stop and think, not just about your absence, but about what your presence used to feel like. He begins to reflect, not because you asked him to, but because now he's confronted with the contrast. When you were always available, he never had to imagine life without you. You were emotionally invested, energetically consistent, and always ready to give. But now there's a gap. That space you once filled is empty, and in that emptiness he begins to feel the impact of your worth. He begins to realize that it wasn't just your attention that mattered. It was your support, your energy, your ability to show up even when he didn't. What he once overlooked now echoes in his silence. What he once dismissed now lingers in his mind, because your absence is not just a lack of presence. It's a powerful statement of value, and here's what's remarkable. You didn't have to convince him. You didn't have to argue or over-explain. You simply stopped showing up for someone who wasn't meeting you, and that decision became the teacher. He starts noticing the little things, the calm in your voice that used to soothe him, the way you asked how he was doing, the energy you brought into the room. Those things used to feel like just who you are, but now that they're gone, he realizes they were gifts. Gifts he never truly acknowledged. Your presence isn't something to be taken lightly. It's a force, it's a healing energy, but when it's taken for granted, when it's not reciprocated or appreciated, pulling back becomes the only way to make it visible again. You become visible in your absence. You become valuable in your distance, not because your worth has changed, but because now, finally, he's beginning to see it clearly, and that's the moment where awareness begins, not just of what he's lost, but of who you've always been. When you're the one constantly reaching, constantly showing up, constantly trying to keep the connection alive, you unconsciously take on the emotional labor of the entire relationship. You become the fuel source, the glue, the one holding the weight of two hearts, and that imbalance begins to cost you deeply. You start making excuses for his silence, filling in the gaps with hope, justifying his distance with your over-effort. But the truth is, every time you do that, you're overcompensating for someone else's emotional absence. And that kind of pattern keeps you stuck in a cycle where your needs are constantly pushed aside. Pulling back isn't punishment, it's realignment. It's the moment you stop carrying both ends of the rope. When you finally release your grip, something powerful happens. The truth reveals itself. If he pulls his end and meets you in the middle, you'll know he's willing to show up. But if he lets the rope drop completely, then you've seen what was real all along. That clarity doesn't come when you're overfunctioning. It comes when you stop. When you choose to stop pouring into something that isn't pouring back into you, you disrupt the entire dynamic. You stop enabling the emotional laziness that's been allowed to thrive. The reason so many people don't change is because they're never required to. If you keep filling in the emotional gaps, there's no urgency for the other person to grow. But the moment you pull back, without rage, without blame, just with solid, silent boundaries, you send a message: this isn't sustainable anymore. And in that moment, he's forced to face his part. He starts to see the effort you were contributing. He begins to understand that the relationship didn't just work, you were making it work, and that realization can be jarring. Because when someone is used to being emotionally carried, they rarely notice it until the weight is returned to them. That's when they begin to notice your strength, not just your love, but the emotional energy you gave freely and consistently. They start to replay the late-night conversations, the times you stayed even when you were hurting, the way you kept trying when they gave you every reason to walk away. But now you've stopped. Now they're left to sit in the space you once filled, and it's uncomfortable. This space is not about control. It's about truth. You are no longer willing to do the emotional work for both of you. You are no longer willing to shrink just to keep someone else comfortable. Pulling back breaks the cycle, it resets the imbalance, it forces the other person to make a choice, rise up or fade out, but either way you win, because you've finally chosen to stop breaking your back to prove your value. You know it now, you're no longer negotiating your worth, you're walking in it. When you decide to pull back, you're not just stepping away from someone else, you're stepping back into yourself. That's what detachment truly is. It's not emotional disconnection, it's not cold silence or calculated distance. It's a powerful return to your own center. It's the moment when your peace becomes a priority, when your boundaries are no longer soft suggestions, and when your energy is no longer a free resource for someone who hasn't earned it. Detachment isn't about punishing the other person. It's about rescuing yourself from a place where you've given too much and received too little. For so long, you may have been entangled, emotionally invested in someone who couldn't or wouldn't meet you at the same level. That kind of emotional entanglement is exhausting. You wake up with your mood tied to whether or not they texted back. You go to sleep with unanswered questions swirling in your head. But when you detach, you cut that emotional thread, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. You say, I no longer allow someone else's lack of effort to define my worth or disturb my peace. That shift is quiet but seismic. It doesn't scream, it doesn't rage, it simply no longer reacts. And the moment you step into detachment, everything around you starts to change. You're no longer controlled by the highs and lows of someone else's inconsistency. You stop dancing around their silence, trying to decode every little action. Instead, you reclaim your focus, you redirect your energy. You start to invest in your own growth, your own healing, your own joy. And from that place of alignment, you stop tolerating what doesn't match your value. That's not pride. That's self-respect in action. What many don't understand is that detachment isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of perspective. You still care. You may still love, but now you're loving with boundaries. You're engaging from a place of choice, not survival. And that energy is so different, it's undeniable. He feels it. He senses the calm, the shift, the absence of your emotional chasing. And in that space, he is left to confront the part he played in pushing you to this point. The comfort of knowing you were always there has been replaced by uncertainty, and in that uncertainty, your value starts to crystallize. You didn't have to say a word. You didn't have to write a long message explaining your pain. Your detachment did the talking, your silence became your power, you pulled your energy back into yourself, and that energetic shift was louder than any conversation. That's the gift of detachment. It recenters you. It restores you, and without even trying, it forces others to realize the gravity of what they lost access to. Because once a woman detaches, not out of anger, but out of clarity, she becomes untouchably powerful. And that power is what makes him stop and finally see what was in front of him the entire time. When your energy is always predictable, always available, and constantly reassuring, it stops standing out. It becomes something he expects rather than something he treasures. The truth is, mystery is not about playing games. It's about preserving your dignity, your depth, and your emotional power. When you pull back, when you stop over-explaining and overextending, you shift from being someone he assumes will always be there to someone he starts to wonder about. And that wonder, that curiosity, is where awareness begins. It's in the not knowing that his interest reignites. He begins to ask himself questions he never had to ask before. Is she moving on? Did I misread her? Why does it feel different without her? You're not being manipulative. You're being wise. Because the more someone feels entitled to your presence, the less they feel inspired to earn it. When you're always the first to reach out, always filling in the silence, always solving the tension, there's no reason for him to try. You've made it too easy, but when you step back, that ease disappears. He no longer knows what you're thinking. He doesn't know if you're still waiting. He doesn't know if he still holds the same place in your life. And that not knowing becomes the catalyst for recognition. It disrupts the comfort, and in the disruption, desire is reborn. Mystery doesn't mean being distant or cold. It means being intentional. It means that you don't give all of yourself to someone who's only giving you half. It means that you allow yourself to be seen in layers, not all at once. You allow discovery. You protect your inner world instead of laying it bare for someone who hasn't earned that access. And that protection doesn't repel, it attracts. Because when you become less available, you become more valuable. Your time feels more sacred. Your attention feels more meaningful. You no longer feel like an option. You feel like a choice. When you're wrapped in mystery, he starts to remember who you were before you made him the center of your emotional world. He begins to reflect on the moments where you were light, laughter, strength, and softness all at once. And now that he no longer feels entitled to that energy, he starts craving it again. He starts rethinking his role in your life. The absence of constant reassurance gives space for reflection, and that reflection leads to awareness. He doesn't miss you because you begged to be noticed. He misses you because your pullback made him see just how brightly you glowed. That's the power of mystery. It brings the focus back to you, not because you demanded it, but because you created space for it. You stepped back from over-explaining your value and simply embodied it. You became the question in his mind instead of the answer always at his fingertips. And in doing so, you reignited the very thing that once drew him to you, the quiet, steady confidence of a woman who knows exactly who she is, even when she says nothing at all. Reclaiming your power doesn't come with fanfare. It comes in quiet, steady choices. It comes when you finally stop giving someone the power to determine your worth based on how they treat you. It's the moment you decide no more begging, no more waiting, no more proving. And that shift doesn't start with him. It starts within you. You wake up one day and realize you've been pouring your light into someone who hasn't been reflecting it back. And instead of dimming your light to keep them comfortable, you decide to rise. That's the moment you begin pulling your energy inward, and that inward shift is what changes everything. You start walking differently. You start talking differently, not because you're pretending, but because you've remembered who you are. You stop allowing someone else's inconsistent attention to rock your sense of self. You stop tying your happiness to their validation. That's real power. Not the kind that tries to dominate or manipulate, but the kind that says, I don't need to chase anything that isn't aligned with me. When you embody that, people feel it. He feels it. He starts to realize that the version of you who waited around, who accepted less, who lowered her standards, she's gone. And in her place stands a woman who knows her value without needing external confirmation. Reclaiming your power also means setting a new emotional standard. You no longer participate in dynamics that drain you. You no longer shrink yourself for the sake of keeping a connection alive. You stop apologizing for having needs, and you stop explaining why you deserve respect. And in that refusal to settle, something miraculous happens. You start attracting people, energy, and opportunities that match your level. You don't have to force it. You don't have to beg. You just align. And when you align, the world responds. He will feel that shift more than any speech or emotional plea. He'll feel it in the silence. He'll feel it in the way you stop reacting. He'll feel it in the energy you once gave so freely, now redirected back to your own life, your own goals, your own healing. And whether he admits it or not, that loss is felt. Because your power was never in your effort to keep him. It was in the way you loved, the way you showed up, the way you gave, and now that you've stopped, it's impossible not to notice what's missing. So when you reclaim your power, don't expect applause, expect peace, expect clarity, expect alignment. The right ones will meet you in that energy. The rest will fade away, not because you weren't enough, but because you finally realized you always were. And when that realization becomes your baseline, you no longer chase. You choose. You no longer break yourself to be seen. You simply stand in your light, and that light, that's what he will remember. That's what he will miss. That's what will make him finally realize your worth. There comes a time in every woman's journey when she reaches a breaking point, not the kind that destroys her, but the kind that awakens her. That moment when she finally pulls back, not to get attention, but to get clarity. It's in that pause, in that sacred silence, where her true power is rediscovered. Because when you've spent so long overgiving, overcompensating, and over-explaining your worth, the greatest revolution is to stop, and to simply be. Not reactive, not desperate, just whole, present, and self-contained. And when you do that, the dynamic changes instantly. because you have changed, the very moment you pull back, he begins to feel something different. Not because you slammed a door, but because you stopped knocking. He feels the loss of energy he once took for granted. He starts to notice the absence of your warmth, your consistency, your effort. What once felt like certainty becomes uncertainty. And that uncertainty forces reflection. The emotional gap that's created by your withdrawal becomes a mirror, and suddenly he sees everything you used to bring into his life, often without asking for anything in return. But this transformation isn't about him, it's about you. It's about standing tall in your truth, recognizing that your energy is not a tool for validation, but a sacred force that deserves respect. You're no longer waiting to be chosen, you are the chooser. You're no longer begging to be seen, you've become unignorable. Pulling back doesn't make you hard, it makes you wise. It reintroduces balance into a space that's been starved of reciprocity. It teaches others how to treat you by showing them what it looks like when you treat yourself with unwavering value. And here's the deepest part of it all. Once you make this shift, you will never go back to who you were. Because once a woman remembers her worth, not in words, but in practice, everything in her life begins to elevate. She stops chasing things that drain her. She stops questioning her enoughness. She starts attracting people, love, and energy that resonate with the powerful frequency of self-respect. And if he returns, it will be because he finally saw what was there all along, not because you reminded him, but because your absence made it clear. So let this be your moment, the moment you stop over-explaining. The moment you stop proving, the moment you stop begging for the bare minimum and start expecting more from others and from yourself. Let this be the moment you pull back, not to punish but to rise, because it's in this pullback that you take your power back. And it's in that power that he finally realizes your worth, but more importantly, so do you. And that realization changes everything. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. If you stayed through to the end of this message, it tells me one thing. You're not just listening, you're ready. Ready to stop shrinking, ready to stop chasing, ready to stop settling for anything less than the love, respect, and energy you give so freely. I want you to know this. Your worth was never missing. It was never broken. It never needed to be proven to anyone. It only needed to be remembered by you, and the moment you begin honoring yourself, the world around you starts shifting to match that energy. So thank you for allowing this space to be a part of your healing. Thank you for choosing to listen, reflect, and rise. You are powerful, you are worthy, and you are no longer waiting to be seen. You are the light. If this message touched something deep inside of you, I invite you to carry this energy forward. Keep choosing you, keep showing up for yourself, and never forget, the moment you pull back, the right people will step forward, not because you chased them, but because you finally stopped and stood in your truth. And goodbye, take care.